Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am OmnusI. Welcome to my lair. Today I'm making a video for two purposes, really. One, it's a video response to the OG video about the new product coming out from Wizards of the Coast, Candlekeep Mysteries. And also I wanted to kind of nail down some thoughts that I had on the subject. It's not one that comes up with me very often because it's certainly a subgenre of a lot of different games, and it's something that I really should have addressed a while ago, so I'll take advantage of the opportunity to do so. So, today's subject is mysteries and how to run them with certain genres. Now, this, of course, is brought up by the announcement of Candlekeep Mysteries, which is one of their adventure paths that's broken up into a lot of smaller parts. These cover 17 different adventures being able to be run by characters from 1st to 16th level. So they're going to have some very basic ones for your starting adventurers, and then in the end work towards more complicated ones. And the OGGM was very down on the proposition because in his mind, D&D thwarts mystery games for a variety of reasons. I'm briefly going to cover his reasons because this is a video response after all, and I want to put his positions down. The major reasons for them is that, in his mind, mysteries are a particular way. We've all become kind of indoctrinated into what do we expect with mysteries. For example, if you watch a TV show and there's a mystery, odds are the person who perpetrated it is in the room when it all starts, because you have only a limited amount of time to make everybody familiar with all the different characters. And if the guilty party is just some guy, it doesn't have the same impact. So you want to involve the person who's behind the incident, be it a murder, a theft, what have you, and they want them to be part of the story to be as efficient as possible, to give it some purpose for everything to be the way they are, and to give you some insights as to the motivation or some reason to care. And it's a convention. In his mind, we all know who do these murders and who does the theft. And in some cases, they actually even show you who does it. They have a little vignette about, showing the crime, and maybe they'll give hints and details about the actual perpetrator. That means the audience knows, and then the entire thing is an exercise watching the mental chess match that goes on with the investigators, unraveling clues and finding out who the actual criminal is. And that can be a problem if it's that formulaic. Dungeons and Dragons, as well as other games, sometimes have a hard time with formulas like that. Replicating that same experience that you might see in a common TV show that features mysteries all the time, or investigations, more the case than actual mysteries in those cases, really relies on the audience not trying to obsess about the end result, but watching the process and the experiences in the process. That's his take on that. Secondly, mysteries are kind of hard when you have people who can cast a spell and get your answer. Going all the way up to a commune spell, which can instantly solve problems for you. You can ask, who did it? And, the divines tell you, well, this person did it. Or if you cast Speak with Dead, that person can tell you, oh, I was killed by this person. So, all told, there are a number of incidents that may cause problems with mysteries in a game like Dungeons and Dragons. And you could extrapolate that, certainly. A mystery for a game like Star Trek, for instance, can be very difficult because, again, it's science magic. It's futuristic tech that does things so amazing that they're practically magic. You want it to happen, the technology makes it happen. And that may seem to thwart the possibility of having any credible mystery involved. But I would kind of argue against that to a certain extent. Because there are certain circumstances that you can set up, there are ways that you can have mysteries set up, knowing that they take place in a magical world or a place with futuristic technology, that still makes mysteries credible and valuable for a number of reasons. And those will be inherent with the purposes for which I'm going to cite for these mysteries in the first place. The first example is a change of pace. Now, if you're telling this great globe-spanning adventure where the players are trying to save the world, it can often be a bit of a slog. Okay, we have to go and we have to stop this cultist from enacting this rune, and then we have to go to this dungeon to retrieve this artifact, and we have to go do this and this and this and this. I've been in those kind of adventures, and they can be somewhat tedious. Throwing in a mystery in the middle of something like that can serve to freshen the whole thing up. It can highlight role-playing opportunities. It can give you other ways of playing other than a grind that some adventures can be. Also, the OGGM did bring up that mysteries don't have combat in them. So outside of somebody like Batman, the world's greatest detective, depending on who's doing the writing, uses his fighting ability frequently to get one over on the criminals, and is often put into a situation. But by acknowledging that that is a possibility, I think that also thwarts the argument that there isn't combat in mysteries. Sometimes you just gotta fight a person. Sometimes you can solve a mystery and then that leads to the fight. So combat isn't necessarily taken off the board with a good mystery. It's just sometimes serves to highlight certain elements in a conflict that is the larger tapestry of the mystery itself. Either a revelation that is brought upon by a conflict that can be a combat, or it might be social combat or something like that. Or you can have a scenario where, you know, there is a combat unless the players are really canny and head it off, in which case it's a victory for the characters if they can thwart the combat without having to resort to drawn blades and cast spells. But ultimately, how much more satisfying is it if the players have outthought the villain, solved the mystery, and then the final combat occurs? Not just because they walked into a door and there's the big bad evil guy, hit the music, let's start the fight. But no, they're going along, and then all of a sudden, but, you know, we put all these clues together, and that's why we know it was you, Chancellor! Aha! Now the fight can start, but you've shown that you have worked through the process, and that you are completely certain that the person that you are fingering is the big bad evil guy, or the perpetrator, or what have you. Then combat can commence in many circumstances. Maybe that doesn't. Maybe for the game you're playing that isn't appropriate, but it doesn't necessarily mean that combat is precluded from a good mystery. And in fact, even if there isn't a lot of combat, there's oftentimes situations, especially in some of the printed materials, where combat is the only result that really is addressed through the adventure. Meeting up with ex-cultists, for example, in Princes of the Apocalypse. They give their combat statistics, but they don't really talk about what the cultists are interested in. It's always, they're fanatics, they just want to attack the players, or they're fanatics, they just want to attack the other fanatics. There's not a lot of middle ground. In a mystery, you can really roleplay that. So even if one of your players is playing a level 3 barbarian, and he's like, well, I haven't killed anything in the last 10 minutes, you know, a well-designed mystery will actually be able to use some of those other skills that you're hanging on to. So, yeah, there may be time to interrogate somebody using your big bulging biceps and maybe your half-worked toothy grin. Maybe that can get a clue out and help further the adventure that you didn't need to punch him into submission to do. This is, as a change of pace, an opportunity to kind of flip the mood and give players something to do that isn't just the same old for their characters. And I think that that's important for a campaign to feel special, and for players to really buy into their players being something more than just pieces on a playing board that you're just moving around to execute your moves appropriately. Yes, I move on the diagonal, my pawn takes your bishop. Well, that's great, but in Dungeons & Dragons, you can do so much more than just make your attack and that's your turn. So mysteries give you an opportunity to do a bit more than that. And I'm not just talking about this from a 5th edition standpoint. This is something that's always been on the table. It's just different game masters value those different options more than others. Some only want to hear your combat doctrine and what you're going to do and assume that you're going to, you know, move forward and fight, or what spell you're going to cast. But if in the more narrative style that Dungeons & Dragons allows a person to tell, then the way that you do things is often important, and a lot of times a character's value is far beyond just what their sword and their spells can do. So it's a nice change of pace, and I think that that really is a key to keeping your players invested in a long-term story. Even if it's interrupting an already existing story arc, giving them something urgent that they throw themselves into that isn't just the same old, can be a breath of fresh air if they've been diligently working ahead. I believe those changes of pace are very healthy for campaigns, and sometimes that can be different things. It doesn't have to be a murder mystery. It can be a shopping trip. It can be a city crawl. It can be something other than what the party has been doing, maybe busting dungeon after dungeon or something like that. So, as a change of pace, I think a mystery is a really good thing to throw in periodically, as long as you do it fairly well. Now, I will acknowledge, of course, that the OGGM has a point that magic can really, really turn an adventure on its ear. But if you're doing it as a change of pace when the party is all loaded up for bear to go bust a dungeon or something, and all their spells are these offensive spells that they can take on foes or heal their friends or help them in a fight, they're not optimized to solve mysteries. Now, granted, a good night's rest and a cleric can flip their spells out and take other spells that will help them for such things, sure. But if you have a time limit murder mystery, the players aren't expecting it, that little wrinkle can make it so they're not optimized to solve a mystery, in which case they have to rely on their native skills, their players' hunches and deductions, and following through the story to its completion rather than just cheesing it with a single spell. In Dungeons & Dragons, like many other role-playing games, there's always the possibility that the players could stumble into something well before they're supposed to. And going with it has been a DM's, tool in their toolbox for a long time. And yes, I understand that if an adventure is, this is how the adventure is set up, this is the path through it, this is the end, if the players start here and go straight to the end, that could be a little deflating. If they do it through cleverness, if they do it through, thinking on their feet, yeah, that can make it seem like all of the stuff in the middle was completely pointless. It does happen sometimes. I'll acknowledge that. It's not as common as some people think. I know it's kind of a no battle plan survives the player's first contact, and that's overused. I think a lot of players are willing to go along with the ride and see the whole story play out. But even if, by some chance, bad luck, what have you, you get to the end before you've gone through most of the middle, then that just gives you an opportunity to let the players kind of play around in the success. So for instance, I haven't read, obviously, Candlekeep, nor has the OGGM. They just announced it's coming out in March. But say the players go to the kingdom and go to the court, and they find out, well, there's this great mystery. And the players go, it's the Chancellor. It's always the Chancellor. And it is the Chancellor. For whatever reason, the story path, it is the Chancellor. And the Chancellor looks at them and says, well, I hope you have proof. And they're like, but you're obviously evil. Okay, look, I'll cast Detect Evil. Hey, you're definitely evil. And the king can go, well, quite honestly, in order to run a kingdom, you need to have somebody who's ruthless enough to do what needs to be done sometimes. We know that he's not the nicest of people, perhaps, and that maybe he doesn't put the most value on life and so on, but at the same time, without him, this kingdom really wouldn't operate. So if you're going to accuse him, I'm afraid you're going to need some proof for that, because we trust him quite a bit, and he's not done anything to show that he's really guilty. The players have to go back and do the work rather than cheese with a spell. Oftentimes, a spell may give you an answer, but the answer doesn't necessarily help you to finish. It just gives you the starting point to go forward. If you know from the very beginning that you cast a spell and you find out who the guilty person is, you can go before a magistrate and say, we cast a spell and it said he did it. The magistrate may go, okay, you cast a spell. Great. I'm sure you believe you cast a spell, but I have no proof. You say that, and hey, maybe you are a cleric of law, and I normally believe everything, but the law demands more proof than you just coming forward saying you cast a spell. Spells may not be admissible in court. So you are going to have to take your knowledge and go and find the proof. Find me some evidence and I can listen to you. But until that time, he's innocent until you've proven anything. So sometimes magic can't just be used to cheese things. And that depends on how well realized your world is. Bear in mind that over the history of time that this court may have seen magic employed to find a guilty party, it's probably seen its share of magic that's been used to deflect blame and point out a wrong person, especially if there's been a lot of influence from the court and to cover up misdeeds of royalty, things like that. Magic can always be used as a sovereign, this is the person who did it. It's kind of like lie detectors. Lie detectors really aren't admissible in court because they can be wrong. They can give false positives. So much in the same way, magic oftentimes can be fairly suspect. Now, if you have magic, it can be a tool. And yeah, sometimes magic can try to give you a straight answer, but oftentimes there's a wiggle room built into most of the spells so that they aren't necessarily as cut and dried. Speak with Dead, for instance, was singled out by the OGGM as something that can thwart such a spell. And while I don't actually have the spell in hand, bear in mind that I believe it gives the perspective of the person. So if they don't know necessarily what happened or somehow something was obscured from them, you're still going to have a flawed perspective. Also, you're getting something directly from the person who was murdered who probably has an emotional investment in what happened. And if the spell compels truth, somebody can believe something that isn't necessarily what they saw. Bear in mind also that if a person in a fantasy world commits something like a murder, they may make steps to make sure that something like Speak with Dead can't reveal their presence, especially if something that's a professional murder. It would definitely behoove an assassin, for instance, to completely say that they have killed somebody to dispose of the body as well. Maybe throwing it into a bag of holding. Common way of doing it. Bag of devouring, even better, but bag of holding and then removing it from the area. Maybe you'll only find bloodstains. Maybe you won't even find bloodstains. But there are ways of killing people that don't leave behind a troublesome body. Divination can be a useful tool in murders and mysteries of all sorts. This is true. But oftentimes there are ways that you can make it so that they are not just handing an answer to you. For instance, if you have a spell that allows you to peel back the fog and go and ask some divine, first of all, many of them are probably going to take some umbrage with just being the answers. You didn't work for this answer, you're just basically casting a spell and doing it. If I was a deity, I might be disappointed at the cleric who basically didn't do the work. They have these big brains and wisdom. Demonstrate it. Use your power. So the response that they get might be very, very cryptic. And in almost every aspect of divination, they always have wiggle room in those spells so that there's some way, shape, or form that the DM can throw in a wrinkle to make it so that it doesn't just hand an answer to the players for something that is plot critical for an adventure. And even if it is a yes-no, there's no prevarication, you have to give a true answer no matter what. Oftentimes, depending on the question, you can be as tricky with the response as you would with any genie's wish. We've already talked about wishes here, where people can really twist the meaning of a question. Oftentimes, those aren't spells that you can cast again and again and again. So if you get one question, better make sure that it's perfectly phrased right, because any wiggle room can get you a response that might be badly misinterpreted. Of course, something that's black and white. Did the Chancellor kill the prince? And if it's yes, the answer is yes, okay, yes, you've solved it. But here's the thing. If the Chancellor was a decent villain at all, that might have just taken the mystery out of it, sure. Because, just like in anything, you have to be ready for everything to fall apart, and now maybe the second half of the Chancellor's plan comes forward once he is exposed, and that breaks off into another form of the adventure. Whatever allies he has might be levied against the players, the Chancellor might try to escape, in which case this turns into a different kind of adventure. Even though the mystery itself was thwarted, which can happen. Again, you try to be ready for eventualities like that, which is why I run my adventures more like a flowchart, more than a linear railroad. You just never know, so be ready for different eventualities. And that's also, by the way, the purpose that almost everything in a scenario and a mystery like that, everybody who is at all allied with the villain is always going to be statted out just to be ready to be thrown in if needed. If everything goes awry, that's kind of how most of these things work. So, divination can be beaten, it can be subverted, and when it happens, it just kind of can be dealt with. It just may mean that, all of a sudden the players have the answers. Maybe they're not ready to resolve them. Maybe they aren't in a position where they can make an accusation safely and be sure of a happy ending. Sometimes it might even mean, though, that you have to just kind of swallow it and say, you solved it, well done. Very intuitive, very well thought out. Here's a reward. And, maybe they didn't go through and fight the evil count who was another power. But maybe if that thing was thwarted, maybe there's a deeper mystery beyond that. That, yes, you took care of the murderer, but the murderer might not have done it alone. Now you have to go and suss out their accomplices. Maybe you have to suss out the true master. You could take it another step forward and continue the story, even if the initial what the resolution was going to be has been thwarted. No, there's a deeper mystery beyond that the players can still go through all of this to find out the true master. A good DM can improvise that way, and quite honestly, yeah, does it seem a little cheesy? Does it seem unfair to you? Well, surprise. For the sacrifice of the story, for the sacrifice of giving the players something to do that makes them feel like they're accomplishing, that makes them feel like they have solved something, that they've done something good and proper in the storyline, that's acceptable to almost every game master I know. It would be a game master who is constantly thrown out of their druthers if they're constantly frustrated because the players come up with some hitch that seems to throw off the overall story. I think it's also essential to consider the name of the adventure, the Candlekeep Mysteries. Candlekeep, in the framework of the Forgotten Realms, is a cliff-top monastery. I believe it's run by the clerics of Agma, but they gather knowledge of all sorts. And I think they have one of the largest libraries in the world, and a lot of thinky type stuff can be centered around there. If you have to go and do research, that's a place you want to be able to have access to do that research, because they have everything there. Good, bad, and different. The monks there don't care. They will collect it all and categorize it, and it will all be preserved. That also does mean that there's a lot of powerful magics protecting the place. It's important to remember that. And there are things that do thwart divination. So if the missions and adventures take place in and around Candlekeep, that may stop a lot of divinations right there, just by their very nature. Some gods cannot peer into Candlekeep. I think the majority of them can't, because they're screened out and protected by, I think it's Agma, and there's protective words over the place that stops anybody from going in, stops the powers of the divines from assaulting this place of learning and of knowledge. So that may be another way that it just simply, that this divination doesn't work, so you better use your other resources where you can. And if it's just an illusion that the stories of these tales are kept in Candlekeep, well, so that's fine too. But I have a feeling that a lot of the things are going to say, well, this speak with dead doesn't work here on this body, because for whatever reason, the soul has been whisked away and can't be approached, or some such like that. I have a feeling that's going to be inherent in some of these mysteries, which may be a clue as to further misdeeds behind what's going on. Now it's not just a crime of killing somebody, it's also a crime of banishing their soul or stealing the soul. making your theft and your crime complete, making sure they can't just be brought back. So, and that might give some hint as to who did it. Who has the resources to do that? Anybody can kill somebody else. Well, most people can kill someone else, but not everybody has the ability to completely hide their crime by, ensnaring the soul and making sure it just doesn't get summoned again. So, yes, I think mysteries are a very useful part of the milieu of games in general. And no matter what genre you're in, a good mystery can really help out a game by giving you more NPCs to care about, a reason to dig into the motivations of NPCs, to include villains that aren't necessarily going to be combat monsters that challenge the whole party. It can be something interesting and intricate, or it can just be something that requires the group to do a bit of legwork to try to hit clues, talk to people, solve things. I don't believe that any one game can't run a mystery. Yes, there are some that are built around doing mysteries, and I will agree with the OGGM that Dungeons & Dragons is not the end-all be-all of games. By all means, go and try other games. There's some really fun ones out there that don't play like Dungeons & Dragons, and you might like doing mysteries off of those. But I do refute that Dungeons & Dragons can be used to do mysteries, and quite easily. Will it be Murder, She Wrote mysteries, where your protagonists are a non-combatant woman who goes around and just kind of stumbles into these murders? You know what? Quite honestly, if I was the law, I would be checking out Jessica Fletcher. She's always around these murders. Is that a coincidence? I don't think so. If I was that cop, I would have her in for questioning all the time. Despite the fact she always seems to solve them, I'm still saying she probably sets up a lot of this stuff. That would be my instinct. No one person can be around that much trouble and not have something to do with it. So, but anyhow, that's my take on it. I think that, taking a flyer and doing a good mystery in the middle of your adventure can be great. If you can tie it into the overall adventure, that's fine too. For instance, we just did Tyranny of Dragons, the storyline with Horde of the Dragon Queen and then the Rise of Tiamat. And we basically ran it through the story path. I don't think we really changed a lot. The DM threw a few things in for flavor, but a lot of our players really didn't bite on anything other than the main storyline, so it was pretty linear. But wouldn't it have been fascinating, I think, if there would have been a mysterious dragon worm speaker that we didn't know the identity of? We knew perhaps they were in Waterdeep, but we had to use detective work and interrogation and finding clues to find them? Wouldn't it be cool if Tiamat, who herself is something of a divinity, would have exercised her influence to thwart our attempts at divination? Because yes, my dwarven wizard would have attempted divination. We had used divination periodically with our cleric to try to nail down yes and no answers to a variety of things, and headed off a few problems by doing so. That's not a universal game experience. Some people just go into things combat blazing, but we thought our way through a number of things. And wouldn't it have been really cool if we'd have had a mystery like that, where we have to find this mysterious cultist and stop them before they execute this rite, which would have possibly taken us through the sewers of Waterdeep. It might have taken us into the bay of Waterdeep to this island screened by magic, which would have then put us in conflict with somebody who would have known the location of the actual worm speaker, and then we could have gone to go after the worm speaker and ruin the ritual, and he would have escaped with a curse on his lips, passing through a portal which would have taken him back to the Well of Dragons to be with the rest of the dragon worm speakers to continue on the storyline. Well, we would have ruined his short-term plans in Waterdeep, which was going to cause a tidal wave to come down, which would have destroyed most of Waterdeep and crushed a lot of the heroes and stopped a lot of the resistance that was coming to the... You see where I'm going with this? Something like this can be fit into almost any storyline, often with a minimum of work, and sometimes if it's tied in with the rest of the storyline, it doesn't feel like it's a waste. It doesn't feel like, oh, we're just going to do this sidebar until we can get back to the regular story. No. Make it part of the story. Use the things at hand if you want to, and resolve it. Basic DMing and dungeon building is set up a challenge for your players, and don't always just let them think that they got the answers right off the bat. Let them work for it. And the victory will be that much sweeter if you can tie everything together and make it uniquely interesting. So, again, going back to the points, D&D really doesn't do well with murders because there's a certain format. Turn that on its ear. We've been doing it forever. You don't necessarily have to have the murderer in the room, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a complete stranger that's doing it. Sometimes you can weave in things and make it still very personal in terms of a mystery. As far as magic cheesing through everything, sometimes magic can be used to prevent it, and if you know what resources the party has, especially when they're lower level, it's easier. But when they get higher level, understanding how the nature of different spells work, there's a way around just about everything to prevent somebody from having an answer handed to them. And even if they have the answer handed to them, still proving it and finding the answers aren't that easy. It may just lead them in the right direction in a way that maybe they didn't have other means to do. So, play ball, use that, and you'd be fine. And if they do manage to bust your story, just flip it on its ear. They may have solved a part of the mystery, just expand it. Some people are really good at doing this on the fly. Sometimes you may have to say, okay, just wait a second. You've solved this part. Give me 5 minutes to make a few notes and change a few things and come up with what happens next. Players will usually do that so they get a good story out of that. Now, of course, if they accuse you, oh, no, you're changing everything because we found this out. Well, if they don't trust you as a game master, you've already got problems, and you've already probably lost this particular scenario anyhow, so can't help you there. Being a game master involves having your players trust you in a large degree, so yeah. And, you know, as far as not being able to have any kind of combat because it's a mystery, again, I refute that. Again, take the Batman approach if you want. Mystery leads into combats, or sometimes combat can be used as a vessel to promote discovery, to resist those who would obfuscate the crime, and again, you know, use that in a very D&D way to let people use all the different skills. And again, crafting a great mystery should lead players to use all of their skills, not just their combat ones. Every character has certain skills and things that they can do, whether or not they're great at them or not. So that might put those different players in positions to use different skills in solving crime. Somebody's been poisoned. Maybe somebody with a nature skill can tell that that is a natural poison, and they might lead them to the source of the poison, which may help them solve the crime. There's different things that you can do to allow everybody to still participate without having to necessarily bash their way through things, and just incorporate a few situations that allows them to bash their way through things. It's all good. So, mysteries in games like D&D, Star Trek, Star Wars, whatever. Good for the game. Good for your players often. Now, if your players don't like mysteries and they don't like the entire idea, you can surprise them and see how they like it. And if you don't want to do it, you don't want to do a mystery, you obviously don't have to. It's your game. Enjoy. Be your own hero. And hopefully you'll have a game that you really enjoy either way. So, I'm OmnusI. This has been another quick video response. Nods to the OGGM for putting out his perspective on that. It made for a very interesting conversation. Until next time, I will be here in my Lair of OmnusI waiting in front of my camera to make another video for you. So until then, thank you and farewell.